All right, welcome to another edition of the Deals for Dentists podcast. And today we have Robert Curtis of Business Group Resources. And you're zooming in from Pennsylvania?
Yes, I am. Just outside of Philadelphia.
All right, thanks for joining us. You can go to Deals for Dentists and you can find his promo offer of get a free, no obligation analysis to see if you qualify for R&D tax credits and for how much. So I want to get into that because that is on how we can actually get some money, because there's nothing better than getting money, but then finding money, that hidden
Right.
money that you can find. So that's awesome. But first of all, you had a master's degree in philosophy and you worked as an industrial spy?
Yeah, that was
That
that was
sounds
interesting. I was right out of school, and it was a company that we were hired by, sometimes the worker comp company for a company, or sometimes the board members who were concerned about what might be going on inside their company. And so they're trying to reach down a number of layers of management to find out what's going on the factory floor, or in the operations. So I would take a job in the company and report back to our account manager in New York. There might be two or three people working with the company, and they would put together the story of what was going on. So we worked for a workers' comp company that they were the workers' comp carrier for a sawmill in Wisconsin, where too many people were getting injured. So it was interesting. I had a job in a sawmill for a few months, and I worked in a hospital in St. Louis. I worked in a manufacturing company in Texas for a while. It was, if you're young and unmarried, you don't mind moving every 3 months. It was a really fun job, and I learned a lot about a lot of different kinds of businesses.
So were you like undercover?
Well, nobody knew that I was actually working for the management company that sent us in. I was like, mid to late 20s. So the excuse was, hey, it was a summer job, while I was in college, or whatever the excuse was. It was part-time. So I was a pharmacy runner in one, and the other I was just in manufacturing. In others, I was just, floor worker. I had a job driving a truck for a jewelry company at one point. So yeah, I was sort of like casual labor, and I just keep my ears and eyes open and engage people in conversation, find out as much as I could. So yeah.
Did you wear a wire, or were you just
No,
writing down
nothing like that.
conversations? Or
No, it was I would just go back to wherever my lodging was at the time at the end of the day, and write 3 or 4 pages of notes, everything I remembered about conversations. And it was somebody in New York who would put together the stories from, 2 or 3 or 4 of us working for the company to kind of get a broader picture of what might be going on. That either the board members or an insurance carrier or somebody else who had liability might be concerned about. So nothing's exciting as wearing a wire. I'm sorry, what?
I was gonna say, so you didn't like drive an Aston Martin or wear a tuxedo like James Bond?
No. You know what? I was driving a beat up old Opel Cadet, which is all I could afford from the stipend in grad school.
Okay, so I had to ask you about that, but
yeah, it's okay.
All right, so tell us about what the HE double hockey sticks is, an R&D tax credit, and how do we get some of that money? Talk to us about that.
I'll give you the 30,000-foot view. The research and development tax credit came in as a temporary measure during the Reagan administration, when U.S. manufacturers were having a hard time competing against the Japanese. So the idea was to give American manufacturers a leg up and help them keep jobs on American shores. So like many government programs, it even though it was temporary, it hung around. And then in 2015, it was made permanent under what's called the PATH Act, protecting Americans from tax hikes. I gotta love those acronyms. So the PATH Act broadened it significantly. So I always joke and tell people one of my biggest competitors is the name, Research and Development Tax Credit. So as people say, well, I never invented anything. I never filed for a patent. And what does it have to do with me? It should probably be renamed the Business Innovation Credit, because at this point it's much, much broader than just what we think of as R&D. It essentially looks at any business where there's a planning or creative process involved in solving a specific problem for an individual client, or in terms of dentist, patient. So some of the things that dentists do every day that they don't even think about that are come under the tax credit are things like just developing a unique diagnosis for a particular patient, designing or considering diagnostic alternatives, just continuously monitoring a patient's health and progress. So, I mean, all these things are just day to day. There are certain things too. You might develop a new procedure. Now, that doesn't mean a procedure that's new to the entire practice of dentistry. It's just a procedure that's new to your office and to your practice. So they're looking for, some sort of innovation or some sort of thought and planning that needs to be considered. And it has to be based on some sort of hard science, engineering, computer science, physical science, or biological science. And certainly dentistry comes under several of those.
Okay, so you mentioned 2015 that it initially started in the 80s to keep jobs in America. When the Trump administration, I remember there was a big company that they tried to keep from moving
Yeah,
to
everybody
Mexico.
wondered about that. You're right. It was Carrier Air
Yeah,
Conditioning
Carrier.
said, hey, we're going to move to Mexico.
Hmm.
And they tried to keep them here, and they found about $25 million. And everybody thought, oh, it was a gift, or they're just trying to pay them to stay here. But actually, what it was the R&D tax credit. So even a large company like Carrier was unaware of the credit and all the things that they did that came under the credit. It was funny, right after that happened, the Wall Street Journal did a poll, and they found that 95% of businesses with 50 employees or fewer either didn't know about the credit or they didn't take the credit, even though they qualified for it. So it was, and the numbers pretty much still the same. It's a startling percentage of companies who could take advantage of the credit and just don't know about it or don't do it.
So as far as dentists, would you say it's like 99.9% have never heard of this?
Pretty close. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. When I ask, most of them are like, "Well, what is that? What does that have to do with me?" Or, never heard of it. Every now and then, I run into a dentist who has, but it's the rarity.
I imagine if an enormous company like Carrier didn't know about it, your typical solo practitioner, mom and pop
Right.
dental office doesn't know about this either.
Sure.
Um, so why is that? Why don't we know about it? Is this something that our CPAs
Well,
don't know
you know
about?
what? Whenever I tell people about it, the first thing almost everybody says is, "I am going to shoot my CPA. I'm going to wring his or her neck." It's not their fault. It's not what they do. Your CPA is a generalist, and he or
Mhm.
she does your taxes. They keep you out of trouble filing your quarterlies. But this is a pretty arcane little corner of the tax code, and we're specialists. To put it in medical terms, if you go to your general practitioner, you trust him or her for certain things. But if they find something that they say, what, I think you need to see a neurologist, or I think you need to see a urologist or a dermatologist, they send you to a specialist. We're the specialists. So we don't compete with your CPA. We complement what your CPA does.
Yeah, so it's like a general practitioner referring a patient to a periodontist, and
Exactly.
a lot of times
No different.
the patient will ask me before the consults, what are they going to do? What are they going to tell me? I'm like, I don't know. This is what they specialize in. That's why you're going to have the consultation.
Exactly.
So it's that is so how do we, what's the process? How do we get started? How do we is there certain qualifications that we have to, is there a big form we have to fill out?
No. The worst part of the entire process is probably having to have a 20-minute conversation with me. It all gets easier after that. Um, Now, we have a pretty streamlined process for that, where we pretty much do all the work. So if somebody is interested, I'd have a short conversation with them to explain just what I'm explaining to you about what the credit is and how it works. And then I'd go through a questionnaire about the particular or specific practice that does take about 20 minutes. After that, we would ask the potential client to upload the last 2 or 3 years of personal and corporate taxes. And it takes us about to a secure OneDrive. And it takes us about a week it depends on the complexity, somewhere between 1 to 3 weeks to come back with a review. And we'll say, this is what we believe we can get back for you. At that point, somebody can say, you know what, I just want to leave this money on the table and walk away, and that's fine. Or they can say, let's proceed. If they choose to proceed, we work on a contingency basis. So we take a percentage of recovery. And if there's no recovery, there's no cost.
Why would someone want to walk away from that? Are they worried about a red flag with the IRS?
Well, they wouldn't. And in terms of red flags, this should not raise a red flag because it is indeed part of the code. It's a normal thing, the tax credit. And we also will defend any work we do because we've been doing this for 16 years. So we're familiar with the tax credit. We understand how it works. We've got a lot of experience working with dentists, both general and specialists. So we understand that. And again, should it come to it, and it never has, we will always defend our work. Now, that being said, the IRS can audit anybody at any time for any reason. And somebody once said to me, suppose 4 years from now, the IRS decides to audit me and they find, that they find some issues. I said, you know what, if they audit you and the issues have anything to do with a tax credit, we will not only defend it, but if we lose, we're liable for any interest and penalties. But if you were messing around someplace else that has nothing to do with the R&D tax credit, your last several vacations and your kid's cell phone is suddenly an office expense, that's a different matter.
So if we're cooking the books, you can't help us out with that. We're on our own.
No, sorry. No, that's not what we do.
So you're essentially, it sounds like a risk-free opportunity for dentists.
Yeah.
And do you specifically just work with dentists or other health professions?
No, I particularly enjoy working with dentists and medical services. But the range of businesses that can benefit from this, it goes from manufacturers to construction to IT and telecommunication services. I usually joke again about the only people I can't help are restaurants and retailers because it's product in, product out. Mm-hmm. But anything where there's thought and individual planning for a specific client comes under the R&D tax credit. So the one thing I will say, it began life as a jobs program. So that's in its DNA. So if I have a company with one W-2 employee who's making $200,000 a year, and then I have another company with 10 W-2 employees, each making $20,000 a year, even though the payroll is the same, the company that's going to benefit more is the company with more employees. Mm-hmm. Now, I know even a small dental practice has hygienists, administrative help. There are a decent number of employees even in a small practice.
Yeah, so we have about 19 to 20 employees. We see about 50 patients a day. So, I mean, when it comes down to every patient is unique, every procedure we're doing is unique, every diagnosis is unique. So what's your typical, let's say for a practice, that, their revenue is around $1 million, just to make it clean. Your standard practice, maybe one or two doctors. Um,
Mhm.
what's a typical credit
So
that
there's no,
they can find?
I never believed in averages or, sort of
Hmm.
typical. I will tell you, the last two dentists I worked with were fairly close in terms of recovery. One practice is about 1 million a year, gross revenue, 10 employees, W-2 employees, including Dennis. The other was about 1,200,000 a year. They had 14 employees. And on one of them, we were able to get back a little over $70,000 in refunds looking back 3 years, 2017, 18, and 19. And the other, we were able to recover $81,000. So
That's
it's a
pretty good.
sizable chunk of money, and
Sure.
some of it depends, how many employees do you have, sort of what's the patient load, how much new equipment have you bought, or are you trying out new procedures? So that can all add to it. But just by virtue of what dentists or any medical practitioner does, they come under the R&D tax credit.
Now, did either of these offices, where you were able to get 70K and 81K, did they just happen to purchase like a CBCT or a CAD cam or a
No,
laser?
no. I mean, there were no, there was some renewal of some of the office equipment they had, a little bit of software, but no huge significant purchases in the last 3 years.
And if they had, would the credits been higher?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Wow. So you said it's 3 years. That's the maximum that you can go backwards?
Yes, unfortunately. The government only lets you go back 3 years. So once a company or a practice files their 2020s in March, that would be the corporate, and then personals in April, then 2017 drops off, and we're looking at 2018, 2019. We certainly can do 2020. So since you brought that up, let me tell you, when I first meet somebody, I'm doing a look back for the last 2 or 3 years. But then they need to wait to get that refund. But when they get the refund, it's whatever they've paid plus interest from the day they pay their taxes until they get the refund. Now, going forward, we would work with the dentist CPA, and we would want to talk to them, make sure that they're on board. But we would do what's called a tax credit study. We would hand it over to the CPA, who would include it in his or her tax filing. So now the benefit is you don't have to wait for a refund. You end up paying less in taxes.
Okay, so this is going to make my head explode asking this question, but
Sorry.
it does that tax credit you get,
Uh-huh.
i- is that tax deductible, or is it we've already paid
Oh, you
taxes
already
on
paid
it,
the money. You're getting money back that you've already paid. So it's, on a federal level, it's tax free.
tax free?
Yeah.
And how does that work? Do we just get a check? Do we have to reinvest it into the business?
No, no, you get a check in the mail. Same as or if you file electronically, you can get a, electronic deposit. Um, the hope when the legislation was passed was that these monies would be reinvested, and ultimately, as the company or the practice grows, more people would be hired. They, of course, would pay wage and federal tax. And so the idea was that this is an investment that will bring around the growth of the company, and then more tax income, or tax benefit later. But it's not a requirement. Some people I've worked with have indeed, it's helped them open a second office, or bring on more staff. Others have taken a European vacation, or helped pay for their kids' college. It's your money.
I would call that basement money. I need to finish my basement. That's basement
There you
money.
go.
So I wanted to go back to those two offices, the 70K, 81K.
Uh-huh.
Did one of them get more because they had more employees? more revenue, or was
It,
it is just a
it
big
was it was
combination
more
of
it was
things?
more revenue,
Mhm.
percentage of time, taken in certain things. Like, so if you have some administrative person, all they're doing is maybe scheduling, well, that's really not something that comes under the R&D tax credit. Certainly a hygienist, maybe if you have your own milling machine, whoever is working that, all that activity would indeed come under it. So it's partially a function of what was the staff doing, what are your revenues. It's a mixture of a number of things well above my pay grade. That's why we have a full staff of CPAs and EAs who work on that.
So, what is the what would you say is like the most you've gotten, and why was that for a particular office? Was it because they were actually doing a lot of innovating and trying a lot of new procedures or using new labs or materials? What's like one of your greatest success stories?
So it wouldn't even be my success story, but within our company, it was well over $250,000. For it was, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was an orthodontist, and they had close to a dozen dentists in the practice, but they were also, doing some cutting edge stuff, some experiment, well, not experimentation, but looking at some new methods. They had bought some new equipment. So it was a mixture of a number of things, number of
That's
staff, income, equipment, business activity. What kind of business activity?
250K. That's one nice basement. That's like
Yeah,
a whole renovation. That's
yeah.
um okay, so let's say I do a lot of implants, I do a lot of 3D planning. I have
Hmm.
a 3D printer, I have a CBCT, we just got a digital scanner.
Well, mhm.
So all these factor in,
Oh
and we could
yeah,
actually.
definitely. Definitely that factors into it because you've added equipment. You're clearly innovating some procedures that you had not done, or improving processes in your office by the use of those. So both the activity and the equipment itself comes into play for the tax credit. And
Okay.
excuse me, of course, you're going to have more employee time spent using that equipment. So the payroll piece comes into it. Everything comes into play.
Okay. Now, does it matter what type of classification of business you are, an S corp, a partnership, solo practitioner? Does that, or independent
Well,
contractors?
well, a couple of things. C corp, you can only go back a year, but most of the practices that I work with are flow through entities, partnerships, LLCs, subchapter S's. There you can go back 3 years. 1099s, usually it depends what a 1099 is doing for the office or for the practice. They usually don't come into play. However, if there are some activities, if you outsource some things that come under the tax credit, the expense for that activity is deductible under, or comes under the tax credit. So it's not necessarily, it's not necessarily a 1099 employee, but you've paid a consulting fee or a fee to an outside organization to conduct something for you.
Outside organization that's in the States, but if it's outside of the States, in a different
Right.
country, then
If it's outside
then
of the
not.
states, yeah, it usually doesn't count. Right. The idea is
Okay.
to strengthen innovation and strengthen business in the United States.
Now, with dental offices since the 80s when it was first introduced, and then in 2015 when it became permanent, did you notice, and with the PATH Act, any changes? Where are dental offices getting more credits? Is it an
Oh,
easier process?
significantly
Yeah.
more, because in the beginning, when it was truly a research and development and a very narrow credit, then it was for somebody who was trailblazing, in the practice of dentistry. inventing, as it were, something new and doing, what we think of research and development, guys in lab coats and clipboards. But now it's much broader since 2015. And that's
Okay.
why any dental practice could benefit from it.
So it could be even, as simple as, we recently switched, like I said previously, from, traditional impressions to a digital scanner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm always trying out different implant systems, um, different labs, and we're trying to, make the best quality product for our patients, the
Sure.
most efficient process. So, I mean, there's so much of that goes on in a day-to-day dental office. So, I mean, this is, it just sounds like a no-brainer to at least look into this.
It is.
Um,
And what you said is why most people discount it. You said that's what we do every day in a dental
yeah.
office. And when you do it every day, you don't think of it as something extraordinary or research or development. It's just, this is what I do.
And you said the analysis, um, how long does that take? And then if we move forward with the um, opportunity, you said that takes about 1 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, the
Um,
analysis is about 1 to 3 weeks.
okay.
Part of it is the complexity of the practice, what they do. Part of it is, around March and April, it's going to take a tiny bit longer because it's tax time. Um, After that, if somebody chooses to go ahead and we prepare amended returns, then we're looking at probably 2 to at most 5 weeks.
Okay. And that's when we can actually expect a check in the mail.
No, no, it takes us 2 to 5 weeks to prepare it. Okay, and then the dentist or whoever the client is would sign it off. We send it to the IRS, and then the IRS normally has come back with a refund within 16 weeks, about 4 months.
Okay.
However, since COVID, I warn people my first conversation with them, it's like the schedule sort of out the window.
Yeah.
It could well be longer than what that 16-week norm is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like
The
to say
good
the word
side,
niche.
excuse me, Eric, the good side though, is that interest is ticking the whole time that they're waiting.
That's like it's like too good. It's like too good to be true. It sounds like.
That's the other objection I get is it sounds too good to be true. But we've been doing this for 16 years. Right now, we're probably getting $1 million a week back for businesses and tax overpayments based on the R&D tax credit.
Yeah. So I would say that, the name, like you said, it sounds like you have to be like some, inventor,
Right.
um, and, testing lab rats in the back of your office to get this. But also the fact that it does sound like it's too good to be true that, or just in general, that most dentists don't know about it.
Mhm.
Um, and I was going to say that I like to say the word niche at least once a
Yeah.
podcast, and you are very
Okay.
niche,
Yeah.
because you're not really competing with the CPA or
No.
CPA. You're working with them as a team.
No, we're accountants with no accountancy clients. We don't want to do year ends. We don't want that regular, what your regular generalist accountant does. We know the R&D tax credit extremely well. We understand how it works, how to maximize it for our clients' benefit, and that is all we want to do. We do a tiny bit, extra when we look at something. We might see a sales and use tax, like you mentioned buying a lot of equipment. Well, somebody may have paid sales tax on that when it's unnecessary because
Hmm.
it's for use in the business. But the lion's share of what we do is the R&D tax credit. So yeah, we work alongside accountants. We do not compete with them.
And you've been doing this a long time, but and you said it has been a bit more streamlined. Is it a very complicated process that you do behind the scenes?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, at the very least, we're probably when it's the simplest of cases, we're probably spending 10 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. and it can go up from there. So for us, it's complicated. Um, we try to make it easy for our clients.
Now, do you find that are most of your clients just your typical solo practitioner, or do you have a lot of DSOs as well?
Mostly solo practitioners, but that may be uh, partially who I tend to enjoy talking to, and who get referred to me. But there
Yeah.
are, one or two dentist offices. Yeah. Just like my dentist, it's a husband and wife team. They're looking at retiring in the next 5 or 6 years. So they brought on a third dentist in the hope that she may take over the practice. Um, Three hygienists. And right now, their son, who is recently out of college and trying to figure out what to do next, is their administrative person in the front office. So my
Okay.
dentist is kind of the average dentist that I
Yep.
work with.
And now, is it, let's say I have one big office versus two, two separate offices, two separate entities, or, two or three locations. What are you finding there? Whether it's I have one office versus multiple locations.
Well, there's a number of things. I mean, part of it is dependent upon, are any of those locations owned, or is it rental property? So that factors into it a little bit. But overall, it's really how much staff do you have? What is the gross revenue of the practice? And any equipment that's bought, and then what is the activity of that practice?
And are you seeing typically more credits for specialists because they're more apt to pull the
Uh,
trigger on that laser or that CBCT?
I will say yes, but not significant.
Hmm.
It's not like, they're getting three times as much, or
Yeah.
something. But yeah, there is a little bit of difference, because you're right. They are looking at perhaps more innovations. They are spending more on equipment. Yeah.
Okay. So wow, this is amazing. So I mean, and it's risk free. It's
Yes.
so you're offering on deals for dentists, get a free no obligation analysis and see if your office qualifies for the R&D tax credits and to find out how much. So that's awesome. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you. I
Do you have any?
appreciate. I was going to say I appreciate the opportunity to bring this to dentists and to help them. I know that my dentist, he's had a rough year. It takes a
Yeah.
lot more time to clean up the operatory between patients, so his patient load is down a little bit. And I know that for a while, people were afraid to go to the dentist, so they weren't doing their twice yearly checkup. So whenever I can help a dentist or a doctor, I really enjoy that. And there's nothing better than seeing a smile on somebody's face when they hear how much money they're getting back.
It's so true. I mean, this past year, 2020 was such a crazy year.
Yep.
Our overhead was up with all the PPE, like you were saying, our
Right.
capacity was down. Once we got everyone back, our wages were the same.
Yeah.
Our collections were down. So,
Yes.
if you can get some extra, cash that's yours
Exactly.
to, it's yours to begin with, then why not? So,
Yep.
um, that is um, so interesting, and I hope a lot more dentists take advantage of this. So, again, Robert Curtis of Business Group Resources. Um, thank you so much. Do you have any last words of advice for the young dentists out there, or any words of wisdom or nuggets?
Well, I don't know that I have any words of wisdom, but my teeth are very important to me. I like to eat, and I just appreciate dentists very much. For what they do, and how they've kept my teeth going. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I know a lot of people are aging out, right? They're leaving their practices, and it's important to see new, younger dentists come in and take over for them. Yeah, we definitely need dentists. And sometimes we should have overlooked. Everybody thinks of doctors, and dentists second, but yeah, they're important.
Well, I'm sure the dentists that you've helped appreciate you and what you've done for them. Um, Again, thanks so much, and
Thank you.
let's be in touch.
Yep, definitely. Take care.
All right. Take care,
Thanks.
Robert. Bye bye.
Bye bye now.